we've tried a number of different things. The potential to make money certainly was appealing, but it's secondary to a mission. It's the stories around people that you help that's way more important than the dollars and cents.
Welcome to the Masters of Business podcast with Daniel Beer.
We have a really special episode for you today. This is Masters of Business. I'm Dan Beer, and on today's episode, we have the founder of eXp Realty, Glenn Sanford, who not only has built a big business, by the way, 90,000 people plus when you count staff and agents, but has built an international business, has taken the company public, and not only that, but has truly created a category in what was an old kind of dinosaur industry and just really changed it, put it all on its head. So there's a lot to jump into. Glenn, welcome. It's a true honor to have you here. It is a true honor to know you.
Well, thanks, Dan. It's great to know you, and you've been obviously knocking it out of the park for a number of years in the industry we share together, and so good to be here.
It was a lot of fun. Glenn and I just had the opportunity I got the opportunity, I'll say, to spend time with Glenn in New York and got to ring the bell over at the NASDAQ and open the market, and just really, really fun. Glenn, I'm going to jump right to the meat of what I think is one of the most interesting, fascinating things that entrepreneurs don't always understand that they're going to one day have to experience, if they want to grow to a certain level. And what you've done in growing this giant company, we'll peel back in a moment, right? And you can give context to the listeners of just how big eXp Realty has become in the residential real estate space. But something that I think you rarely see, and in fact, it's why companies don't continue to grow, and eXp right now is on a tremendous trajectory, is as founder, you recently, when was it, a year ago, 2 years ago, you were CEO of the company, and you replaced yourself in the day-to-day operation as CEO with now who is in the seat, Leo Pareja. And I have to think that that's not an easy thing to do, to let go of. It's not an easy thing, right? It's your baby. And I mean, I'm an entrepreneur as well, a much smaller organization than yours. It's certainly not a public company, but I can't imagine how hard it would be for me. And I think there's lessons that anybody listening who's building a business can think about. And so I'll let you take that over. But I'm wondering a lot of things, including when you even started thinking about the possibility of doing that. I mean, that cannot be easy. And yet you've set your company up for decades of success by having what it takes to do so.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sort of noticing those changes. And it's definitely an interesting dynamic, finding someone that you trust to take the reins to continue to shepherd the business. I started in the residential real estate industry coming out of did an e-commerce logistics company, did some stuff with AOL. So I come out of more of a tech background, but I also was mentored by a number of business people. And one of the things that I noticed even when I was building my real estate career, which I've been in the business now 22 going on 23 years, is as ambitious as I was, the business wasn't profitable, big enough, structured enough to be able to bring somebody in that would be like-minded to join me on the journey. So when your business isn't, if it doesn't get to a certain size, then it's hard to hire somebody that is fundamentally as good as you are, because if they're as good as you are, they're probably doing their own thing. And so, for me, it's like, how do we get something to, whether we call it launch velocity. So, in order for a rocket ship to go to outer space, it has to get to something like 7,000 miles an hour just to break out into orbit. And you think about, for a business that has to grow fast enough and long enough to basically get to orbit, which basically means that now you can hire people who fundamentally you couldn't afford before to come in and continue to help you build the business. Now we've tried a number of different things over the years in terms of people that we brought on at different levels, and we tried to bring in experts, which, by the way, if you're running a business that has a unique value proposition, the last person you want to bring in is an expert, because an expert will tell you all the ways it can't be done, and they'll take you out of your mission. So
Sounds
you
like an
don't really,
attorney.
yeah, well, there may have been an attorney or two involved. Uh, um, the um, but you want to find somebody who understands the mission and is more of a generalist, but still very ambitious. And ambitious is different than competitiveness. I think you and I heard a speaker that never split the difference, gentleman,
Chris Voss.
Chris Voss, and he mentioned something that stuck with me. This was only a few months ago, but he mentioned that ambition is sort of this continual looking for the next way to sort of express yourself in your domain, whereas competitiveness is sort of comparing yourself to others. And if you compete, what happens when you win? Well, you all of a sudden don't have typically the need to compete anymore because you're already top
It's
dog.
the end of the mission.
Right. And whereas ambition has more to do with, what's the North Star that you can always sort of hook yourself to. So and with that, if you can adopt people in that will take on that same mission and they're of the right mindset, then you maybe are lucky enough to be able to sort of pass the reins and turn over some of the day to day in the business.
There has to be so many lessons in that. What do you look for in leaders for your team? At your level, you'd call it your C-suite, but your executive team, your leadership team, your directors. As you were saying that, I was thinking about, say, take a company like Microsoft. There's people at Microsoft, at Apple, at Google that are not the CEO, that are not the founder, who could 100% be the founders of their own companies, could absolutely be the CEOs of their own companies. They have everything it takes to be massively talented people. And yet, how do you design a world in which these folks choose to be a part of of something that already exists versus their own? Because they all have ego, they all have confidence, they all know they can do it. Your people included, the executive team that you've put together, they know what they could go and do on their own. And so how you think about what needs to be built so that you can invite people in of that caliber.
Yeah, so one of the phrases I've been using lately with the team is you get onto the team by being a specialist, but you stay on the team by being a generalist. Um, and what that means is that generally you think about all of the different domains that need to be expressed in order for a company to thrive. You've got marketing, you've got you've got all the various functions. You've got a leadership component, a growth component, a financing component, potentially facilities and bricks and mortar, and all the other things. And all of these take a degree of understanding that you don't really know unless you've done it, or you're being mentored by, or you've studied, or what have you. So what you end up with is a lot of people who fundamentally could get funded and start their own businesses, but they'd also still need to build out the rest of their team in order to execute against their mission, because they themselves are a specialist and they don't have the generalist, understanding. One of my favorite books that I read in the 90s was The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber.
Yeah, sure.
And really the idea is the technician sort of gets all excited about being an entrepreneur, and then they have to show up one day and they have to do finances, payroll, clean the toilets, and all the other things that have nothing to do with why their expertise. And they have to quickly become generalists, but then they have to quickly think about what does it take to do that job effectively and manualize that part of the business at least to a level so somebody else can come in and support them, especially in the early stages when you don't have a lot of money, you're not able to pay top dollar for talent. And so you've got to sort of think about, how do I make this almost McDonald's, ready for somebody to come in and sort of support that. But eventually, thinking about these same individuals that might be in this organization, eventually some of them will get it. Most of them won't. Most of them will be, they need the process oriented workflows, or some of them will become more creative, and then some of them will leave. I mean, the reality is that we've had lots of people inside of our organization that have left and attempted, and I say attempted because, being an entrepreneur is, maybe one out of every five, maybe one out of every 10 times you even get something really off the launch pad, not even to sort of, fully scaled. And then to actually get it to scale, it's probably a 1 in 1,000 in terms of just the percentage. So 0.1% that your likelihood that you'll get to some meaningful scales. And I think that a lot of people feel like, hey, if I can be an entrepreneur, I can get paid a good amount of income. You look at your organization gets large enough, and we can pay comp that's comparable to the comp that they would be earning if they were running a small business.
They were running their own. It's really, really interesting. It's wild to hear you talking about the generalist, because first of all, for years, I feel like everything is about specialize. And this morning, like literally this morning, I'm at a breathwork class that has a cold plunge and a sauna. And I'm in the sauna after the breathwork class. And I'm sitting next to this lady who's sitting next to another lady. And they're having a conversation about business. And by the way, if you've heard of the brand Viore, it's kind of, like a Lululemon type brand that's taking off like crazy, especially on the West Coast. One of those ladies worked there. And so anyway, one of them recommends to the other this book, and she says that it's about, I don't remember exactly what she said, but the gist of it was that it talks about how being a generalist is somehow more positive, or at some point becomes more positive than a specialist. And I'm sitting there next to this lady thinking, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And now I'm on this thing with you a few hours later, and I know you know what you're talking about, and you're saying the same, you're referencing the same thing. So it's just kind of a wild serendipitous thing that I literally this morning was the first time that idea had ever been presented. I just overheard a conversation, and here you are saying that, talking about that, broaching the same subject.
Well, if you think about it, you're a specialist that has become a generalist. In order to run your business, there was I'll find the name, I'll probably figure out what this book is because I think I just was recommended a similar book called Range.
Yes, that was it. It was Range. Yes.
Yeah. So it's actually on my to read list.
Yes.
But I haven't read it yet. But if you think about it, you are both a specialist in that you know your thing really, really well, but you know enough about the other parts of your business well enough that people can't pull the wool over your eyes, but you're not a specialist.
It's really interesting. It makes perfect sense. I have learned more than I ever imagined about everything from CRMs to databases to marketing to sales. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's really interesting. So I'm curious, Glenn, there's a whole bunch of questions that are just like so much to ask you. As you're building what you've built, and feel free to give a brief description of, what it is. You've built a category of your own inside a traditional space, a residential real estate brokerage, but you've built a category of your own. Feel free to give context to the listener, what that is. Why am I saying what I'm saying? And also, I'm curious, once you do that, there was the time when that was just some crazy idea you were having. When did you know that, wait, this might actually work? This might actually, I don't think I've got to go back to the drawing board. Was that month 1, year 10? When did that happen?
Yeah. So just to kind of, bring some context, I'm the founder of EXP Realty, where, we created a new category in organized real estate. We coined the term cloud-based real estate brokerage, and now you can't start a new brand that is ambitious, that doesn't embrace the cloud as its primary vehicle of connecting agents, your brokers and staff. Um, and the reason is because the biggest single cost to run a real estate brokerage historically has been the bricks and mortar, followed by the staffing costs. And when that was the norm, that was also the point in time when you had a singular agent who had great relationships and could gather listings, bring them into an office setting, and then they needed buyer's agents to go and show those same listings. So this is sort of pre-MLS days. But even when the MLS showed up, we didn't have the internet. I mean, the MLS was running in at least in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s for sure. There was MLS before the web. But now you sort of fast forward to 2009 when we started EXP. In 2009 compared to 1999 or certainly 1989, by that point in time, consumers were pretty much using the web as their primary vehicle to search for homes. It's no longer going and grabbing a magazine or getting a tear sheet of properties that were listed for sale. The agents, the only reason why they continued to go to an office was because that's where they turned in their paperwork and that's where they picked up their check. And maybe there was a sales office meeting, and if they had an office, that was a nice perk, but it wasn't a necessary perk. And 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 uh, and so what ended up happening is 2008, the downturn had taken place in the housing market, and I'd come out of technology, and sort of all the light bulbs went off that high-speed internet's now here. The future real estate brokerage is not going to have any bricks and mortar. A lot of people have been talking about that for a number of years prior. And we just said, why don't we build it? One, we can't afford physical offices. But then two was, what would it take for an agent to want to untether from their physical bricks and mortar based, traditional brand and come work for this new brand? And I'm an entrepreneur. And I feel like entrepreneurs attract other entrepreneurs. I've been involved with probably probably more than that, probably 7 or 8 different network marketing companies from the time I was 17. And at that point, I'm 42 years old. So in 21 years, half my life, I'd been involved with a number of different network marketing companies, not because they made money. I mean, the potential to make money certainly was appealing. But what I noticed, which I thought was really unique, was that when you brought together people into that environment, during the day, they went to their standard job, whether it be a standard real estate brokerage or whatever. But when they got together with others that were sort of rowing in the same direction, they all could potentially create more income. They were just a better version of themselves. So, by this point in time, I'd kind of gathered enough understanding about business that I thought this would work. I figured, hey, we got a better cap and split than anybody else in the industry. We know there's agents who like the idea of building some sort of residual because there's no retirement in residential real estate. And so we believed on paper that it would work. Now, we didn't know that it was going to grow this large. Like I figured, my first goal was, can we get to 1,000 agents? So that was sort of my first goal. And I knew if we could get to really about 300 or 400 agents, we crossed over to break even territory in terms of just cash flow. And then, but if we get to 1,000 agents, I felt like that's a large brokerage. I mean, there wasn't a lot of brokerages over 1,000 agents. By the time we got to about 500 agents, which really was 2015, I think, is when we crossed over, we were already starting to look at 10,000 agents. And we thought we would be there by 2020. And we were over actually almost 20,000 agents by the end of 2020. And so for us, it was, it made sense on paper. You don't start a business plan if you don't believe it's going to work. If you don't believe it's going to work, you're probably right. So you need to believe in it. But we never had a month where we had fewer agents than we had the month before. And we never, and we were, growing generally, 5% a month on pretty low numbers, but we just did the math and said, hey, if we can keep this thing going, and every 6 months uh, well, every year it was growing by 50%, which was actually a really steady growth rate. It was actually better quality growth rate than when you're growing at 150, 200%. And we just sort of did the math, and we could see that, by 2012, 2013, and we became a public company in 2013. So we weren't yet even 400 agents, because we knew that if we could add a little bit of extra juice and incentive that nobody else had added to the equation, that it potentially could grow even faster. So that was it. But we believed in it pretty much from day one. But we didn't really know we were going to get to a large size until probably 2015.
I had a really interesting conversation on this podcast actually with Ryan Young, founder of Fellow, and we're talking about how it's only every 5 years, it seems like. That's just me going off gut. Every 5 or so, 6, 7 years, it seems like there's a technology in the context of that conversation that truly matters. Wow, this makes a really big difference to his audience is also real estate agents. That's why I bring it up with you. And I said, well, it only seems to happen every 5, 6 years or so. He said, well, yes, because when it happens, everyone else just starts following. Everyone else just starts saying, oh, I'll build that too. So you're seeing some of that happen in the real estate space ever since I don't know what it seems like just some years back, where maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, where there was suddenly a big hockey stick kind of growth pattern that EXP started to experience. And so I want to talk about first mover advantage. How real is it? Because you'll get people, hey, it's clearly an advantage. That's why it's called that, but it's not a guarantee. So when does how impactful is it? How do you see it playing out in your industry? What puts the first mover advantage at risk, where someone can lose it and the category killer goes down? Why does that happen sometimes?
Yeah. Well, first mover's advantage is real. You pick up a certain amount of market share at a lower overall expense with higher margin generally than your next competitor. So the next competitor has to spend more money and has to do something that, effectively makes it either less expensive, or they're just spending more money to get there. And those are resources that, the first mover doesn't have to sort of deal with, because they've already built a bit of a war chest. Now, the ongoing piece is that you can't lose focus on what it is why you exist. The most pathetic reason to exist is to make money. Um, and and yet, all of our metrics are based around money. But if you think about it, what legacy do you want for your family to remember? Now, money's certainly a factor, but do you want them to know that you made, millions and millions of dollars, or do you want them to know that you helped 5,000 families with the needs relative to housing? And I help these people fundamentally get into homes, and the stories that go with it. And more likely, it's the stories around people that you help that's way more important than the dollars and cents. And so what ends up happening for most organizations, the reason why founder-led companies can tend to outperform, especially if they make it to a certain level, is because the founder keeps in mind, why is it that we're here? Now, money's a factor, so don't think that it's not, but it's secondary to a mission. And the mission for us is to be the most agent-centric real estate brokerage on the planet, and to really impact 1 million agents' lives, over the course of the business. So we think at some point we'll have a million agents on the EXP platform. And, you know,
Worldwide, correct?
worldwide. Yeah, not in the US. I mean, that would be like 2/3 of the whole industry. Um, and, but worldwide, that would be about 5%, less than 5% of agents worldwide would make a million agents. So it's fairly similar to what where we're at in the US is about, 4 to 5% of agents in the US are with EXP. If we can get to similar density, and not even all the countries, but if we can get to a similar density and, quite a number of countries, we could have a million agents. And for me, that seems to be like, that's I'd love to be able to have that. Like I impacted a million agents' lives in a positive way. And so that becomes the mission. So then you think about, okay, what goes into that? One, you have to have a good value proposition, sort of cost, value for monies expended by your customer, in our case, the agent. But then you always have to be iterating. If you generate more margin than the next guy or gal, then you need to put that margin to work enhancing what you offer to your customer. Because if you start to try to just gather all the dollars, it's Aesop's fable. What's the goose that laid the golden egg? If all you do is try to basically collect all the eggs, and you want to get them faster, so you slaughter the goose. Eventually, you've got no goose laying any eggs whatsoever. So it's always about taking care of the goose, you know, reinvesting the egg, so to speak, and continuing to use that as an advantage from a first mover's perspective. So, but competition's good. The reality is that
But you're saying though, staying mission focused is one of the keys. Why do we exist? Remembering that always is one of the keys in not losing. It's because it's first mover advantage. It's not first mover guarantee. And the first mover advantage, one of the key ways to hold on to it, if I'm hearing the lesson that you're leaving us with, is you have to remember why you got here to begin with, what brought you to the table. It's like, it's so huge what you're saying. And sometimes it sounds like just words when people talk about, like helping, people making an impact. No, it's not just words. Like I had, for example, hope you don't mind me saying, I'm sure everyone assumes you have a nice vehicle. I had the privilege of driving in your very nice electric Porsche. Very, very nice. But here's what I know. I bet that compared to when you might have been driving your first car, it makes a big difference. But compared to when you upgraded from, your BMW or your Mercedes or whatever it is you had, Glenn, it doesn't matter. The point is when you upgraded from a normal luxury car to like a higher end, like your life it's nice, but it doesn't really matter. Like that's not getting you up in the morning whatsoever. The impact of just making more money is just not nearly enough to get somebody out of bed. That's like, it has to be about a lot more. There's that point at which, yes, going from I'm struggling and my car won't turn on sometimes to, hey, I have a car that turns on every single time. Like that makes an impact. But beyond that point, it's just nice, but it doesn't truly light you up. At least not me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, for sure.
The impact does though.
Yeah, the impact's really what it all comes down to is sort of the impact on other people's lives. And it's ironically, on a relative basis, I live pretty modest compared to what my on paper net worth is. Um, but and I don't really put a lot of thinking into it. I enjoy, like, one of the things that you'll discover, especially if you earn a lot, is at some point you do have to go back and say, why am I doing this? Because initially when most of us as real estate professionals, we get into the business because we need to make money, or any business. You get into it, you get sales, you start a business. There's a need on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need to put a roof over your head. You need to put food on the table. You need to have some basics in place, and that's a struggle for most people to get there. And then eventually, if you work hard enough, you get lucky, what have you, you start to actually build a nest egg. And then pretty soon that nest egg could get quite large. And then you actually, that's the point where a lot of people would go through what they call midlife crisis, or they'll go through some sort of crisis of confidence. Like, what is it they're doing? Because they've now actualized um, everything that they had on their dream board. And if you can do that, then what is it that you should think about for future dreams? Is it physical possessions? Some people it is. Nothing wrong with that. But for me, it's like that you can only buy so many things. You can only spend so much time in multiple houses, or different cars, or whatever. At some point, it has to be about more than possessions. It has to be about otherwise you may as well just opt out.
Yeah, I hear you. It's so really, really important. I wanted to just touch on that because it's just striking me. A lot of that resonates, just frankly, right? Like, I've asked myself, why am I doing this? Where am I going? Why does this matter? Why do we need to grow why do we need to grow the business? Why do we need to keep pushing? And if you can't tie it to more than because if the bank account looks different, okay, fine, but are you different? The bank account looking different eventually doesn't make you different. But these other parts of life do. So coming right back here, first mover advantage. All right, so going into the competitive business space, you have copycat models chasing, nipping, going like there, and some of them are building. There's good businesses. No one's saying that EXP is it. Like there's other businesses out there that are pushing. Why? What is it that whether it be about the operational challenges that are going to be ahead, the financial or economic challenges that they might be in or ahead, or what makes you confident that that your company is positioned really in a really, really advantageous place relative to the competitive landscape?
Yeah, so a couple things come to mind. One is, at least in organized real estate, has a bunch of different brands in it. It's different than, let's say, e-commerce. E-commerce, you've really got, two players. You got Amazon, and then you got Shopify. And outside of that, the percentage of e-commerce transactions gets pretty low pretty quick outside of maybe travel. Um, but it's like one word. It's easy for people to sort of understand. In the organized real estate space, I think Zillow is attempting to do the same thing in terms of mind share, but people don't shop for homes every day like they shop for everything else. Like, I'm on Amazon at least 4 to 5 times a week, but I'm hitting the order button. Stuff's getting shipped to my house, and it just makes it convenient. I buy a home, you know, as maybe once every 4 or 5 or 6 years type of thing. And so for me, um, it's such a confusing process that I want to work with somebody that I know, like, and trust. And the brand doesn't matter to me as a consumer. What matters to me is the agent. But I think for agents, I don't think agents all want to be associated with one brand. I think the fragmentation that exists in the real estate industry has to do with the fact that we all have a innate need to almost be part of an underdog, or part of a niche, or some way, something that differentiates us from the masses of brokerages. So that being said, you know, EXP at scale, it's maybe we're 10, maybe we're 15% of the industry in the US is sort of a top level number, but there's still going to be other competitors out there. And I don't know how big they're going to get or not get. What I do know is what I'm focused on, which is building the most agent-centric real estate brokerage, and one that agents will be proud to be associated with. I think we'll be the largest for a while. I mean, we're the largest by both agent count and transaction count presently. But that doesn't mean that's always going to be the case. But again, if I think about what is my mission, it's not fundamentally to be the biggest, it's to be the most agent-centric. And so that may be there's companies that go on acquisition sprees. They'll go and buy everybody to bulk up to create sort of the illusion of market share. But that's probably not sustainable. But if you've got enough money, you could be bigger. There's probably a lot of different ways to do it. But for us, it's like we're the agent centric. We're not the broker owner centric. We're not the influencer centric. We're the agent centric real estate brokerage. So for me, it's just stay true to the mission. Don't pay that much attention to what the competitors are doing unless they're doing something interesting, in which case, figure out if it's some stuff we should adopt because we didn't think about it prior. But and always just keep iterating and delivering.
Well, what I'm recognizing in your answer is it's almost hard for you to answer the question in that you're focused inward. It reminds me of that. It reminds me of that photo that I think a lot of us have seen with Michael Phelps in the Olympics, just charging through his lane, and then somebody next to him, kind of looking over at him, and it's like this meme that made its way around and
Right.
said something like, winners focus on where they're headed, and the others focus on the person next to them. So it just reminds me a lot of that extreme focus. It's really, really good. So what's next for your company?
Yeah. So I've made a shift personally, partially because as I turned over the reins of EXP to Leo Perea, so that was just really that was just in May or June this last year. So it hasn't even been a year yet. But with that, there was an opportunity to go in and help the international team. So I've been working with them for the last 6-7 months, pretty aggressively, kind of building a startup mindset inside of international. I think that's paying a lot of dividends. Really coaching and training more leadership and staff to be better leaders. And for me, that's where I spent a lot of time. But also, there is a growth focus. So don't get me wrong. When I say focused on being the most agent centric, there is also what KPIs are we looking at each and every day? Like how many agents are in fact choosing to hang their license, brand new every day in the company? If the people that are leaving, why are they leaving? What could have we done better for them? So there's an innate focus on what is it that we can do better.
What are those KPIs, Glenn? I'd love to ask just because
well,
we get people in different industries here. What do you look at?
Yeah, so on international, we're starting to build out a set of KPIs that start with, how many agents have expressed interest in EXP, how many EXP explains are we doing, how many people are attending those, how many people are starting join sessions, and how many of those people who start join sessions that finish were active, productive agents. So meaning that they have past production and they're not just hanging their license to hang their license, they're actually hanging their license here or joining, because a lot of places there's no license, because they want to be associated with us for their career. So those are the metrics from a growth perspective, and then net promoter score is another one that I focus heavily on. So the ultimate question 2.0, if you ever get a chance to read the book, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely would you refer a friend or colleague to join EXP Realty? That's the basic question. And based on the score, what most influenced you to give us that score? And what a lot of people don't realize, it's not the number that counts. It's the free flow information that is entered after they put a number in. So a lot of times if they put 9s or 10s, they say, hey, you're doing a great job, love EXP. If they're a 7 or 8, they might provide some light critiques. But if they're a 0 to 6, there's usually some major critiques in there of things we could do better. And as crazy as it sounds, I love being able to read the detractors and the passive comments, because in my mind, that's where the real value is and where we can rally around actually improving the company. And so there's a lot of people think, well, if they give a bad score, that means that somebody's going to lose their job or they're going to get reprimanded. But it has zero to do with reprimanding anybody. It's more of how, as a company, do we continue to get better for the most important constituent of the company, which is our agents. So that's probably our number one KPI, and then I would call that the most leading KPI, followed by all the other numbers that I mentioned.
So as you're looking at all these things, and I can't imagine how many people pitch you on let's do this, let's do that, whether it be ideas, whether it be partners, vendors, new streams of revenue for the company. I mean, the amount of things that must come across your desk are almost uncountable, I would think. What's your framework, Glenn, that we could maybe adopt for when you're looking at these different opportunities or what look like opportunities? How do you know when you're looking at an opportunity that's actually worth pursuing versus what really is just a distraction? How do you know, how can you identify, said differently, something worth doing versus a shiny object? Because sometimes they look pretty darn similar. So how do you go about differentiating that? To me, this is one of the areas that really determine like how strong an entrepreneur, a business person is at this aspect is a big determinant of if they're going to stay on course or not.
Yeah, we've been asked to do all kinds of things over the years, and by the way, we've tried a number of them. And the you have to be willing to innovate in what you're doing. So continue to iterate and innovate. Um, but a lot of times you don't know what is going to work or what's not going to work. Hopefully, you don't overpay especially for the stuff that doesn't work, um, because you're going to, it's almost like bringing on a senior person in the organization, a C-suiter. Um, I only get about 50% of the time. 50% of the time, do I get it right? I just have no clue in advance which one is going to be right, and which one's going to be wrong. And I think that's the same thing generally with sort of acquisitions or mergers or different ideas. You don't know which ones are going to work or which ones aren't. You want to measure, how much capital outlay are you going to put in before you can take a true measurement to see if you actually are winning. And if you do win, you should have some idea of what a win looks like. And so I think there needs to be some analytics attached to your decision making, but it's tough. We all have biases. We all think we know better than we do. I mean, I'm sure you've tried more than your fair share of failed experiments that you thought made sense when you went into them. But I think that's just par for the course. You just don't know, but you get better at it over time, and you start to go, okay, what am I really good at? And let's make sure that we keep on pushing there. But you also still need to exercise a little bit of your backhand and try things that you aren't as good at to see if there's a there. So it's not a cut and dry type of exercise. You just have to experiment and learn as you go.
So you're willing to make mistakes is what I'm hearing. You're willing to try. It sounds like you have a pretty fair risk tolerance, Glenn. Tell me if I'm labeling you incorrectly.
I have a fairly high
Um,
risk tolerance. Yeah.
with kind of the magic sauce being, how do I limit downside if this thing doesn't work out?
Right. So I never risk the farm. I never sort of bet the farm. We've taken on zero debt in the growth of the company. And you look at companies like Anywhere, Compass, and a few others that have taken on a lot of debt and have a
Understated.
lot of debt service. And you kind of wonder how they're going to sort of work their way out of it. Um, one, if you can make strategic bets with debt, and your bets work out, you get a lot of leverage, but it also creates a lot of potential downside. So for us, we thought, let's use equity, not to say that we have an unlimited amount of equity, but we can always live to fight another day when we sort of, agent, takes in a share of stock in lieu of cash or some other aspect to it. We've got ways to kind of create cash flow inside the organization that we can then use and try things with. And some of them will work. And but we're not going to bet the farm. There's a principle in investing that I learned a number of years ago. And it's also used in like poker and other sort of betting sports. But if you know the risk percentage, what percentage of the time are you going to lose your bet? What percentage are you going to win your bet? And if you know you're going to win 100%, then you can bet everything on it. But virtually there's no bet that exists where you get 100%, you know, surety on your bet. It's always something below that. So as a result, you always have to temper your bet based on the risk involved. For me, I think about risk in terms of what's referred to in betting and investing in what's called a Kelly. And a Kelly is basically a a type of bet that you can take that's aggressive enough to be meaningful if you win, but doesn't take you out of the game in any meaningful way if you lose. And so you have to sort of think about that. And if you think about it from that perspective, it actually gives you more liberty to take risks because you actually know how to quantify risks.
Really good. So this person, this thing we call Glenn Sanford. Let's go back to maybe where we would have even started here at the beginning. Who is Glenn Sanford? How are you? Let's go back to like what stands out from your childhood that shaped a lot of what's allowed you to create such a big business. I mean, bigger than, I don't know what the number is, but I have to think it's a, 0.0001% type of result that you've gotten compared to all the businesses that have been attempted out there. So who are you? What? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, when I was growing up, I was born in northern Alberta. My dad and my uncle were beekeepers along with my grandpa up there. Beekeepers, yeah. We lived in a single wide manufactured home on the train tracks in northern Alberta. We homesteaded up there, so they got the land for free as long as they lived on the land for like 5 years or something like that. And we ended up moving to the lower mainland of BC when I was like 4 years old. And the house. Well, actually, we moved our trailer, so we pulled our our house to British Columbia. Moved to another house. My dad was an entrepreneur. He was tried a lot of different businesses and invested in a lot of different things. But he ended up getting into the granola manufacturing business because in granola you put honey into granola during the manufacturing, so they kind of levered some of the income into a granola company. And so from about age 7 to age 13, in a fairly short period of time, we went from single wide manufactured home to the second largest home in the lower mainland of British Columbia. So I got exposed to both ends of the sort of the spectrum. What I recognized even during that period of time, maybe it was 15, I think, was when we moved to Oklahoma. But what I learned in that time was that a business ownership, if run properly, can make a huge impact. Because I had good friends as a kid who I didn't see them progress. I saw their parents struggle. I saw sort of their struggle. And so my dad shared with me a phrase when I was young, which is that it's riskier to take a job than it is to be an entrepreneur. Um, and and of course, that's the exact opposite of about 99% of the population that exists out there. It's riskier to be an entrepreneur than to go get a good job. Go get a good paying job is kind of the axiom in most households. And he explained it a little bit further, which was, when you get a job, that's the most you'll ever make. When you're an entrepreneur, it's unlimited potential. And so I kind of believed in this unlimited potential piece. My dad, even back then, he was dabbling in small public companies. We lived just outside of Vancouver. There was the Vancouver Stock Exchange. Of course, he was making a lot of money, so all the stockbrokers in town were calling him to invest in their next deal or resource project or whatever it was. And I even dabbled at 14, 15 years old in the stock market. Pretty much lost my $1,000 or whatever it was that I was playing with, but I kind of started to learn a little bit about that. And my dad gave me another lesson, which I thought was really an interesting one. And the lesson was he held up a $100 bill, and then he held up a share certificate worth $100. And he asked me the basic question, which is, which one's worth more? And um, you know, I think the common answer is, if you give me the $100 share certificate, um, you know, versus $100, I can go spend $100, but I can't go spend a share certificate. However, if you think about how most wealth is created, most wealth is created through the creation of businesses. Real estate's certainly a part of it, but businesses, if you look at the wealthiest of the wealthy, they were built through businesses and this thing called a share certificate. You know, it's an interest in a fictional fictional entity, aka a business that has the rights to collect money and do different things. And so he said, if I give you $100 share certificate, in all likelihood you'll give me $100. And I can go back to my treasury and I can print another $100 share certificate, and I can go find another investor and I can give them the share certificate. I can get $100. So he said, if I go to the back and I print $100 bills, I go to jail. If I print $100 certificates, people will give me money for that. So share certificates are more valuable. So for me, I kind of I nerded out about sort of how companies are structured, not the financing stuff. Like there's people who are way smarter on Series A, Series B, Series C's, all that type of stuff. But what I recognize is that I could create an idea out of nothing. I could incorporate it, and I could create shares, certificates, or ownership interests in those ideas, and then use that to actually execute against my business idea. So those are a couple like early on lessons around business. I had
Really interesting.
another mentor who used to work for Kerry Packer, the Australian billionaire, and that mentor is now passed, but he had kind of an engineering mindset, and sort of to help me understand how businesses should be put together and structured. And so there's a lot of structuring things that I learned um, from him. But at the end of the day, there were so many books that I read, tons and tons of books. I started reading business books probably starting with How to Win Friends and Influence People. Probably read that when I was like 11 or 12 years old. And then I just knew fundamentally I was going to be an entrepreneur, and pretty early on recognized that I would, other than generating some short-term cash, would never fundamentally work for anybody else.
So it's riskier to get a job than to be an entrepreneur. Wrote that one down. Love that. Love that. Well, Glenn, the last thing I really want to ask you here is, I just can't help but think, like, sometimes we could see somebody like yourself and we start giving you, especially as you get published and your, personal information ends up on CNBC and what your shares are worth, all that. And you start getting these, but at the end of the day, I think you're really just a person like anybody else. You're going through your own journey. You're learning. It's often astonishing to me, like, oh, man, like, how do you, like, you didn't know how to run a company with tens of thousands of people until you were doing it. So there's a learning as you fly aspect. And so number one is, I just want to recognize, like, we're all on the same journey. We're just trying to be better. We're trying to grow. And as you look at where you're at and look back, if you could go back and you look at, boy, there was a big lesson. If I'd known that lesson 5 years earlier, who knows? Maybe my company would be twice as big today. When you look back, what stands out as we try and extract a nugget from your experience that maybe the rest of us could use as well along our journey? And maybe we could use it even earlier because you did the learning for us.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got a little different journey, and everybody's got a little different story, and they attach different meaning to those stories. But for me, one of them was, I came out when I got into real estate. I was actually looking for my next project. Real estate was not what I was planning to get into, but it was a way to pay the bills while I was looking for my next project. And but I'd made sort of a commitment from the prior company. I'd found an e-commerce logistics company, which by all measures should have been successful. But I had a really bad business partner, and I was not a majority shareholder in a company that I created. And so one of the things is if you fundamentally know what it is that you want to do, and you've got conviction, you've got expertise, you've got background, whatever that is, you know, don't give up control too early. Um, because control, especially of things that you're truly uh, an expert in, and at a deep level that you're going to be successful. The problem is that if you lose control too early, then you're going to be at the mercy of whoever that is that has more control than you. And most of the time, they haven't thought as deeply. They don't understand it. It just doesn't make sense. So, we've all heard, that, 50-50 partnerships don't really work because one person puts all the work and one person, sort of coasts. And so, um, I tend to agree with that. So I never took on, you know, any sort of 50-50 partnership, in when we started EXP or what have you. Um, so I, and what I, the religious decision that I made post eshippers.com prior to real estate was I would never answer to a board of directors, I'd never answer to shareholders again. So, one, never say never. Um, but when you do it, do it in a way that you get to continue to do what it is that you're passionate about, and can make a difference, continuing on with. I think that for me is a key learning that, if you really know what you're doing, make sure you control your destiny.
Man, it's been so great. Glenn Sanford, founder of EXP Realty. Thank you for coming on. It's a real honor. It'll be fun to check in with you down the line, and of course, I get the privilege of riding right alongside you as I've clearly chosen to build my business, my career within the infrastructure that you built. But thank you for giving us that inside look. And guys, this is Masters of Business. We're out.